just as my mother-in-law went to the cupboard to get the Tupperware.
Suddenly, my father-in-law collapsed and fell out of his chair. Everyone was looking at him, and he's holding his stomach. He seems to be in of pain.
What's wrong with you?
And then my father-in-law said something surprising.
I just ate a bit of food from the kitchen.
Why is my stomach suddenly upset?
Did you eat some of that?
I didn't miss my mother-in-law's comment.
My name is Elizabeth. I'm a 28-year-old housewife. My husband, Vernon, and I got married here. We have the same age, so our conversation and values are very compatible. We get along very well because of that. And we are just as much in love after we got married as we were before we started dating. However, there was one thing that bothered me a little when we got married. When we went to my in-laws to say our wedding greetings, I noticed that my mother-in-law was a bit old-fashioned.
When you get married, you come to our house and live with us, right?
My mother-in-law asked us as if it was a given.
My husband and I both said, "What?" So my husband said, "No, we're not going to spend our married life alone. We'll have a family." My mother-in-law asked,
Why? And why the eldest son?
Both my husband and I were troubled.
Then my father-in-law said, "That's an old-fashioned way of thinking."
Do whatever you want, Vernon and Elizabeth.
He put the mother to rest by saying like that.
But there was a further problem, that the atmosphere worse. Neither my husband nor I had planned a wedding ceremony. I don't like to do anything too fancy. We were talking about how we would use the money for travel and so on for the wedding ceremony. When I told my in-laws about Mary, their faces turned grim once again.
How can you not have a wedding?
As I mentioned earlier, my mother-in-law is an old-fashioned person.
She was vehemently opposed to our idea of not having a wedding.
How should we tell our relatives?
My mother-in-law believes that the eldest son is the most important.
So she doesn't approve of any ideas that don't conform to her beliefs. But again, my father-in-law helped me.
None of the relatives care about the wedding.
They just think it's a great opportunity to have a nice meal. After a while, they'll forget they didn't have a wedding. So if you guys decide not to have a WEC, that's fine.
My father-in-law was very kind and respected our opinion.
It saved us from being forced to adopt my mother-in-law's old ideas. Well, my mother-in-law wasn't happy about it. So we got married without a wedding and started living together on our own. I became a housewife to support my husband's career. I feel very happy doing housework and lunch and dinner for my husband ever. I think it will be even more fun when we have children someday. Then, about 2 months after our marriage, my in-laws asked if we'd like to visit them. Both my husband and I had had some disagreements with my mother-in-law, so we were a little worried. But we haven't visited my parents-in-law's house since we got married, so we should visit them. I was bracing myself for my mother-in-law's attempts to bully me, but surprisingly, she didn't do anything mean. On the contrary, she was very kind.
If you have any questions about being a housewife, you can always ask me.
I have all kinds of recipes, and I'll teach you everything I know.
My mother-in-law loves to cook, and she often invites neighbors over.
She says that her home parties are very popular and that she holds them regularly. In fact, I had a homemade meal prepared by my mother-in-law on that day, and it was very delicious. Not only my father-in-law, but also my mother-in-law is very kind, and I felt that they didn't need to worry about anything. My husband felt the same way. He felt that it would be no problem to visit his parents once in a while. Then, about 3 months later, my parents-in-law asked me to have a dinner party at their house. Since we had trusted them so much the first time, we were happy to go to their house again. There, my mother-in-law served us food I had only seen in expensive restaurants.
My husband also praised her. You are getting better and better cooking.
You didn't make anything like this when I was a kid.
Your food is really delicious.
Thank you so much for preparing so many delicious dishes. My mother-in-law smiled happily as she looked at it. She told me to eat a lot. I had a great time. But that night, I had a terrible stomach ache, and as I sat in the bathroom, I began to feel faint and weak.
Hey, Elizabeth, are you okay?
My husband's voice faded away.
When I woke up, I was on a bed in a hospital. Apparently, my husband called an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital. The doctors said they couldn't figure out what was wrong. They said it wasn't food poisoning or anything. I only had an idea that maybe there was much olive oil in the pasta I had for lunch. I never found out what it was after all. After that, I was put on an IV drip and took a good rest. That helped me feel better, and my husband and I went home and went to bed. What the hell was going on? But I never had any more symptoms after that. But 2 months later, the same thing happened again. Suddenly, I felt sick. The only thing that was the same as last time was that it was after eating my mother-in-law's cooking at my parents-in-law's house. Was my mother-in-law's food rotten? But my husband, who ate the same food as me, was completely fine. But a month after that, the same thing happened after we had dinner at my in-laws' house. I invited a friend over for lunch to discuss why this was happening to me.
Isn't that coming from stress?
I got a little nervous when she said that.
But maybe somewhere along the way, I've developed a bit of a nervousness around my mother-in-law. Besides, I was getting sick every time I went to my parents-in-law's house, so my husband was worried too. Therefore, my husband suggested that we visit my in-laws' house for a weekend. I don't know the cause, but this always happens when we eat at my parents-in-law's house. My husband said it had something to do with my mother-in-law's cooking. I wonder if that's the case. After that, my mother-in-law contacted him several times to ask if we wanted to have dinner with her. My husband always refused, thinking. However, after a while, we got another invitation to a dinner party. And this time, there was a reason we couldn't refuse. My brother-in-law and his wife were coming to my parents-in-law's house for their wedding greeting. I was a little depressed because I had been feeling better recently by not going to my parents-in-law's house. My husband told me I didn't have to eat so much. I decided to try not to eat as much as possible. And then the day of the party arrived. My mother-in-law was as kind to me as she could be. As long as we talked normally, I didn't sick. Maybe there was something wrong with the food after all. A little later, my mother-in-law and his wife arrived. We had a nice conversation with them. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law washed the dishes with great skill, and more dishes were being on the table. My mother-in-law's name, cooked food, looks beautiful and very delicious. In fact, the food I've eaten so far has tasted very good. So I still couldn't understand why I was getting sick, no matter how many times I thought about it. As soon as we sat down, my mother-in-law suggested that I eat the food.
Elizabeth, you said you liked this dish, didn't you?
I made it very delicious today, so please try it.
When my mother-in-law said this to me, I didn't know what to do.
Then my husband came and said, Elizabeth is a little sick today.
So let her pick at what she can eat when she can.
But my mother-in-law said, well, then this amount of food should be fine, right?
She put a small plate in front of me with a little less food on it. When I was wondering what to do, my brother-in-law said to me,
Elizabeth, if you're not feeling well, you don't have to force yourself.
I've already said hello to you, so if you feel sick, please don't hesitate to go home and get some rest.
Apparently, My husband told his brother and his sister-in-law about everything.
It seemed that my brother-in-law and wife, who knew what was going on, helped me to get through it. My mother-in-law thought I couldn't eat her food.
Well, then, made it. So put it in a Tupperware and take it home.
She said.
I wondered why she wanted me to eat badly, but I figured that if I was taking it home, I didn't have to eat it anyway. You're welcome. And just as my mother-in-law went to the cupboard to get the Tupperware, my father-in-law suddenly collapsed and fell off his chair. We all turned our heads to look at him as he was holding his stomach and seemed to be in a lot of pain.
He still hasn't touched the food on the table.
What the hell is going on? And then my father-in-law said something surprising. My husband called an ambulance, right? My mother-in-law accompanied my father-in-law to the hospital. We were stunned at my parents' in-laws' house, but I was thinking about what my mother-in-law had said earlier. Apparently, my brother-in-law's wife heard her too, and we thought that there might be a secret in the kitchen. We decided to investigate the kitchen where my mother-in-law was standing, and we found something surprising. We drove to the hospital where my father-in-law was taken. As soon as we got through the hospital's reception desk, we went straight to his room where we heard voices coming from inside. The doctor was asking my mother-in-law if she had any idea what was wrong with my father-in-law. My mother-in-law said she knew nothing about it. Then we went into the room. My mother-in-law looked flustered.
Oh, you guys came all the way here, but it's all right.
She said, as long as I'm here, it'll be fine.
But we were not going to let this chance pass us by. Is it said, I need to talk to you and walk up to my mother-in-law? My husband, my brother-in-law, and his friend followed me.
What the hell is wrong with you guys?
My father-in-law's condition seemed to have stabilized somewhat, and his complexion had returned to normal.
But they didn't know the cause yet. Apparently, he was conscious for a while after arriving at the hospital. After going to the bathroom several times, he became dehydrated and completely lost consciousness. I looked at my mother-in-law straight in the eye, took something out of my bag, and gave it to her. When my mother-in-law saw it, she got mad. Do you recognize this?
Well, what is it?
She was trying to play ignorance.
This is a laxative. Don't know why there were so many laxatives in the kitchen. My mother-in-law became silent. Then the doctor said,
I see that he had these symptoms because he ingested a lot of laxatives.
We'll run some tests later. By the way, if laxatives are detected, I'll have to ask him when he ingested laxatives. If he doesn't have any idea when he ingested the laxative, it means that he was intentionally given it by someone else. It would be an injury charge.
When the doctor said that, my mother-in-law suddenly panicked.
No, it's not like that.
I didn't try to make him eat that food. It was negligence.
My husband reacted to my mother-in-law's words.
Then who were you trying to feed that?
Well, it's not.
My mother-in-law clammed up.
You're not going to tell us, so we'll have to call the police and have them it out.
When my husband said that, my mother-in-law said, "Oh, I'm so sorry."
Okay, I got it. And she confessed everything to us. It was all for Elizabeth.
I was going to punish her by feeding her a laxative meal.
What do you mean, punish me? What did I do to you?
Because my son married you.
He's become a bad son. You didn't live with us and you didn't have a wedding. You're the one who persuaded him of this. That's why you're my enemy.
That's just unjustified resentment.
My husband and I talked about that too. Is that why you've been putting laxatives in the food you've been feeding me?
It wasn't a lot of laxatives before.
That's why you've been fine.
Don't be silly. I've even been rushed to the emergency room.
How can you say that? It wasn't a lot. My husband and brother-in-law followed statement and blamed my mother.
I can't forgive you to do that to my Elizabeth.
I'd be furious too if my future wife would be like her.
And then my husband and brother-in-law made a statement that they would disown my mother-in-law.
My mother-in-law started to cringe. Then my father-in-law put the final nail in the coffin. My father-in-law seemed to have woken up halfway through the conversation and was listening to us.
You've done a terrible thing out of your ego.
You should have been arrested by... I'm so disappointed in you.
Even you say like that.
You're not divorcing me, are you?
That's not enough.
Of course you have to work for it. I won't be helping you in any way.
Oh, no.
It's impossible. I've been a stay-at-home mom my whole life.
Shut up.
If you don't accept these terms, I divorce you immediately and turn you police.
What?
My mother-in-law had no choice but to work and pay me $30,000.
Now she's working hard and paying me by little. My father-in-law is watching her, and she cannot cheat at all. All of her salary goes to pay that. She seems quite overwhelmed, but I think she deserves it because she hurt me that much. Meanwhile, my husband and I are living happily. My father-in-law and my husband both told me that I don't have to see my mother-in-law. It feels so much better now. I know I've been through a lot, but with my husband and father-in-law around, I know that I'll be okay no matter what happens.
It's a crime to feed someone food containing laxatives, isn't it?
Isn't it a little too much for a mother-in-law to do such a thing without any hesitation? I wonder why he married a person like that. But the two sons seem decent. Maybe her mother-in-law was decent too with, well, I do know the truth, but the punishment for the mother-in-law is appropriate. I hope that she will work hard and pay $1,000 to Elizabeth. And I hope Elizabeth and her husband will live happily ever after.